Hello, my name is Robert Toth, and this is my presentation on private placement offerings for Finance 139 with Dr. Shahrokhi. So firstly, what is a private placement offering and why is it important? Businesses constantly seek to expand themselves, and that's because a larger business is considered to be inherently more stable than a smaller one. Firms have developed many different ways to generate the capital they need for that expansion over the years, one of which is known as a private placement offering, or PPO. A PPO is a sale of stock shares or bonds to select investing individuals and businesses rather than to be bought and sold on an open market. So firms must adhere to specific guidelines in order to keep this offering private and not public, as a public offering requires registration with the Securities and Exchange Commission, as well as a suite of regulations. Besides limiting the number of investors and the amount of money raised, firms may also opt to work with accredited investors. Although firms will not be able to raise as much money as in a public offering, PPOs enable a business to raise capital without becoming a fully fledged publicly traded company. So an important document associated with these offerings is known as a private placement memorandum. This document states the objectives, expectations, and risks of the associated business. A good private placement memorandum should factually state all relevant information without leaving out important details. It should be noted that this is not meant as a marketing document and it is distinct from a business plan. However, savvy investors will still carefully inspect it in order to ascertain whether the business in question is professional and prepared. The next document to go over is called a term sheet. A term sheet will give definitions and details for the potential offering. Now, this is not a legally binding document, but it is intended to serve as an outline for later documentation that will be legally binding. Because it's not legally binding, these are comparatively cheap to make for businesses. Thus, they can use to gauge interest among investors. And although most of the document is not binding, they may include a binding no-shop clause. And all that means is that once an investor has signed the document to indicate interest, the business is not allowed to solicit a lower bid from another investor. And that's just an act of good faith in order to ensure that there are no bidding wars. The next term to go over is due diligence. Now, unlike the previous two terms, this is not a document. Rather, this refers to the process of properly evaluating a business deal to be engaged in. Now, this is an important legal and financial term related to the buying and selling of securities. And this is part of the reason why accredited investors are desired for private offerings. It's because private offerings are less regulated than public ones. So accredited investors are assumed to have the knowledge and expertise required to perform proper due diligence on these securities. In overview, private placement offerings are a valuable tool for firms to raise money, especially for startups and small businesses who may not yet have the expertise or desire to go fully public. Even though PPOs are much less regulated than publicly traded offerings, they still have to abide by certain requirements in order to get that private exemption. Private placement memorandums are of great importance for informing investors of potential risks with the business. Term sheet is also important for laying out details in a potential business deal and will serve as an outline for a future legally binding agreement. Finally, investors are expected to perform due diligence when evaluating these transactions. And that's generally true for any kind of security, but especially so with private placement offerings. Thank you for your interest in this presentation. I hope you learned something valuable today.